Okay, I think we better get started. Welcome. I'm Steve McDonald. I'm the director of the Africa program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center and the project on leadership and building state capacity. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. You probably are all aware that it's the living memorial to former President Woodrow Wilson. We are very happy to be able to host this distinguished panel today. Looking at Nigeria, you're all aware of some of the things that are going on there with the fuel subsidy issues, the recent oil spill in the Tonga area in the Delta, and of course the Boko Haram issues that have arisen and how the government is responding to that. We have a very able panel. I do have to announce right up front that one of our panelists, Mr. Simuno from Shell, the country director for Shell Oil, was not able to come after all. He had to cancel his trip yesterday, late yesterday, because of a demand that he stay in the country. So Olav Lozinji, the office director here for Shell, is filling in for him, and will be giving us some remarks from Shell's perspective. I won't introduce any of the other panelists because our astute moderator is going to be doing that. A good friend from long-standing, Ambassador Howard Jeter, who you've got his bio in front of you, so you know he was a career minister with 27 years experience in the Foreign Service, with postings all over the continent. I first met you, I think, in Namibia, Howard, I believe, as I recall, some time ago. And he was, of course, one of our most recent ambassadors to Nigeria. So we're very happy to have him and his expertise and experience to lead our panel here today. On the housekeeping side, you need to be aware that we are webcasting today's event. So when we do get to the question and answer period and some interchanges, be sure to wait for a microphone to come your way after you've been recognized. Always identify yourself and your association, and do it loudly so they can hear. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Howard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon to everyone. Our topic today is a very catchy one: subsidies, spills, and security. And it's one of those issues that even can displace focus and media attention on Boko Haram. By the way, for those of you who thought that we might talk about that today, that's tomorrow at the end. Sorry, Cynthia. This is a topic that I've had an interest in for many, many years, particularly the Niger Delta and the environmental impact that the oil industry has had in the Delta on the environment, on the lives of people. We've seen something extraordinary in Nigeria with the recent protests on subsidies. It's not the first time that has happened. There have been protests in the past. There have been national shutdowns in the past. But this recent protests on subsidies took on a different dimension. And Dr. Deidre Lepin and Peter Lewis and others, Ambassador Reddick, will address that subject. On the subject of spills, let me just read you a few statistics. Each year since the 1960s, there has been a spill the size of the Exxon Valdez into the Niger Delta. Each year since the 1960s. The Exxon Valdez was something between 260,000 and 750,000 barrels of oil. That has been going into the Niger Delta each year. And according to a group of independent experts, between 9 million and 13 million barrels of oil have been spilled in the Niger Delta since drilling began in 1958. The Nigerian government itself estimates that 7,000 spills, large and small, occurred between 1970 and 2000. Today, there are about 2,000 oil-polluted sites needing cleanup in the Niger Delta. Those are horrific numbers. And something has got to be done about it. We hope that the president will, we know he's busy, and he has challenges, but we hope that he will start to turn some of his attention to the needs in the Niger Delta. Today we have an eminent group of presenters, and we thought we would begin with the representative of Shell Oil Company, Olav Ljosne. Is that close even?
That's close enough.
Okay. Well, Olav has held the post of Senior Manager for Shell's International Operations since February of 2010. And before assuming his current position, he was actually based in Lagos for 5 years as the Regional External Director Africa for Shell Oil. Prior to that, he had a 20-year career. Prior to his 20-year career with Shell, he served as a diplomat at Norwegian embassies in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, and worked with the United Nations. He is very familiar with what's going on in Nigeria on a day-to-day basis. And since the country director could not be here today, we would like to express our appreciation to Olav for coming literally at the very last minute to make this presentation. Olav, thank you very much.
Thank you. You want to keep me here? Is that I should be here. Panelists to be seated. First of all, apologize on behalf of Mutu Sunomu, who was unable to come and has been called for other tasks. As you know, our operation in Nigeria is the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria, and Shell only has a 30% part of that company, together with Total and Ajib, who together have 15, and the remaining part is held by the Nigerian government. When the government calls, they are the lead, and they are the one we work with. It's been a very challenging year in Nigeria, for Nigeria and for Nigerians, and the latest months, even reflected in today's news, have been clearly reflected the challenges for the country and also the challenges for the president and his cabinet. I will not deal much with the political side of it, but the security issue, as we are covering today, is a huge one. And it's a huge one despite, as an oil producer working mainly in the Niger Delta, we see also some really improvement in the security situation compared with what we had in the period from 2005 leading to about 2009, and after the amnesty was signed with the militant groups in the Delta, there has been quite an improvement despite ongoing attacks on oil installations, oil theft, bunkering, kidnapping, and other issues. It's certainly to the better than what we saw only some few years ago, and the oil production has been going up, so has the gas production. So there are positive news in a picture which has been very much dominated by the situation in the north. As an oil company, we are not producing oil or have special activities in the north, but of course the situation in the capital area and the mid-belt is of high concern to us, as for the rest of the country. We have seen the riots, and there's been the riots on a riot. Oh, I should. Okay. Hope that's better. Some man with the camera that got the mic to work. That's interesting. But what we have seen on the gasoline prices is, of course, a very alarming signal to the government, but also an alarming signal to the world in general for the most populous country in Africa, where there also been announced cutting in subsidies of the rice. So both food and energy seems to be areas of concern for the government when it comes to financing, when it comes to the subsidy issues, and in a certain move by the government to take a better control on the finances of the country. The finances of the country is dominated by the oil industry. That's the foreign reserves, the foreign currencies, but also the general GNP being dominated by the petroleum sector. On the security side, if I also may mention on the area of the Niger Delta, we have an election ahead of us in Bayelsa, and that's something we are following very closely. And hopefully that election of Bayelsa new governor will go without any violence. We can hope, and we think it's possible, but it's also an issue of certain concern. On the real business side and relations to the government, the petroleum industry bill is the main issue outstanding. That industry bill will create a framework for future investments, both offshore and onshore in Nigeria, and the petroleum minister has appointed a special task force that has been given the mandate to come up with a new proposal, revised proposal of the PIB that will be presented to the ministry, and thereafter the ministry will be prepared to present this to the House of Representatives. But as a single issue, I like to point to that, seen from a petroleum industry side. This is key for our future investments, and that's key to know the framework within where we are operating. On the spill side, I'm just trying to address a few of the headlines for this meeting, so I'm going through them. Seen from the energy and the oil side, we certainly have challenges. And the latest spill of Bonga, about 80 miles offshore Nigeria, where 40,000 barrels were spilt, has been contained, has been cleaned up, and has been managed. But it's certainly an area where we are not proud of the situation, despite being in a situation that we don't know fully what happened. We are doing investigations on that. But the damaged pipeline, the instruments that didn't work, has been repaired, and the operation is back, and the cleanup has been fulfilled. Onshore was referred to by Ambassador who introduced us to the spills of the Niger Delta, and the reference that you actually had to the Exxon Valdez is certainly an unknown reference for us. We know it's been written, we know it's been thrown up, and I know where it's been written, but it's no scientific or any proper evidence that these figures are correct when it comes to the total spill in the Niger Delta. And it's certainly areas where we are able to document, and that's documentations that we are putting on the website, that our contribution to the spills, whether that spills based on sabotage, which is about 95% of the spills that we are facing in the Delta, or it spills for operational reasons, the figures are actually far lower than what's been used by some movements arguing the Exxon Valdez reference. There is also the other focus has been a UNEP report with a certain set of recommendations to the government. UNEP was an initiative where SPDC and the government invited UNEP to do this study, and there are clear recommendations which we appreciate, and recommendations that we from an industry side are implementing. There are other recommendations that's for the government to follow up, and that's being handled in the correct government dedicated organizations to manage. I'll not go into details on that, but if needed we can easily do that. I would just point that in a quite turbulent situation in Nigeria, there are some positive elements on where the energy side is moving, both on the gas side and on the oil side. There are positive moves where the government want to move the finances of the country, and altogether, in a very turbulent phase, there are these positive things we need to address and understand that can be leading Nigeria in a correct direction. I also like to point at the governor's role in the states, especially in the states where we are operating. The governors in the states in the Niger Delta are trying to take quite an active role in supporting the industry, in managing the security, and in managing also the investments that's required, not at least to manage the unemployment and manage the follow-up of the amnesty, which is still a key issue around the security situation in the Niger Delta. There has been some initiatives between governments, French, US government, on training of security forces, managing security, and advising on security, which is very positive. These initiatives are also what we can see contributions to a more secure Niger Delta. I'm not saying that the situation is sorted, but I'm saying that there are some positive elements and things are better in the Niger Delta than it was only 2-3 years ago. I think I will leave it with that. I was asked to just give a few comments to the points, and rest will be for us to discuss.
Olav, thank you very, very much, and that was very enlightening, I think, to all of us. And I think we would like to hear a bit more once the presentations are done about what Shell is actually doing to implement the UNEP recommendations and what the government is doing and what the government might do more in order to implement those recommendations. Our next speaker is someone who has vast experience on Nigeria. As a matter of fact, she's worked on, studied, lived in Nigeria over the past 40 years. She's a former Woodrow Wilson Center scholar and is currently a senior fellow at the African Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania. She's been a consultant to government, non-governmental organizations, and at one point was a resident corporate community development advisor for Shell in the Niger Delta. Dr. Deidre Lepine.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk rather generally about the recent events of January because they seem to be a major turning point, in my view, in the history of Nigeria. There's been a good deal of talk in the air, especially in the past year, that Nigeria is a nation that's on the brink or on the edge. And indeed, there are times such as this very tumultuous month of January when it seems so. But many familiar with Nigeria and its history have seen this young giant full of energy and promise do a very similar dance before, moving to the edge and then back, driven by rash imprudence or anger, testing the possibilities before thinking better of it, and stopping short of falling over the edge. Nigeria's playwright and Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka gave a name to this dance. He called it a movement of transition. The concept came to light in his first and probably most brilliant play, aptly called A Dance of the Forests. At that time, Soyinka's work concentrated on Nigeria as a new nation. And he and many others felt a deep apprehension about the challenge of the nation's rulers and thinkers as they faced molding this vast ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic diversity into a functioning state that could deliver on its great promise. That apprehension, judging from Soyinka's many cautionary statements during this very month, has not gone away. Soyinka and many intellectuals at the early post-independence period recognized that modernization and democratization would require not only many profound political and economic changes, but also a psychological and even spiritual transition in the hearts and minds of each and every citizen. In the play A Dance of the Forests, many of the characters exploring life in the new nation find themselves unconsciously driven by traditional warring forces who foster their own special interests by luring them as lackeys into a battle among themselves. The selfish cynicism leaves the future hope of the Nigerian people unrealized in the balance. But through this process of self-examination and self-awareness, a few of the dramatis personae succeed in liberating themselves from what Soyinka calls their soul-deadening habit. And those are the ones who begin to take the steps toward genuine change. Now, political and social transformation in a country as vast as Nigeria can't be dictated. The movement of transition requires a complex transformation that is personal as well as collective. And such transitions on a national scale have been seen a few times before in Nigerians' history, and each one moved the country forward. For example, in 1970, there was the One Nigeria campaign that healed and reunified the country at the end of the Biafran Civil War. In 1998 and 1999, the country embraced with enthusiasm and profound relief the coming of the Fourth Republic. That democratic transition ended 16 years of military rule and the rapacious dictatorship of Sani Abacha. And then last April, 2011, after a series of increasingly questionable elections, the Jonathan administration organized and effectively mobilized the Nigerian people around a single unifying idea once again. This time it was the hope of a free and fair election. Our change has come was the slogan of the youth, repeated again and again. President Jonathan gained 59% of the total vote. It was a fairly clear mandate for his approach to governance. So that was the start of the third transition, but it's still going on. The outcome was tragically marred, briefly, by the outbreak of violence in some northern states. But most voters saw this as a change wrought by universal suffrage and an exercise of free personal will. The events of this month, which many call the January Awakening, kind of like the Arab Spring, is probably best understood as an extension of that change begun in the April election. It's a dance of transition to, one might call, a Jonathan style or a Jonathan style administration, to a different kind of government, and it was accompanied by the promise of a more open, more technically competent, and more responsible style of governance. That election, which engaged everyone in unifying this national project, pledged, rhetorically at least, that change in the form of social and economic justice was coming. And then the people waited. A few committees were formed, one to investigate the sources of the post-election unrest in the North, and a second committee to reconstitute the dysfunctional Niger Delta Development Commission, which had floundered for a number of years. And then the government in November announced that it was going to lift the fuel subsidy, which in 2011 had saved $8 billion from the government budget. It had to go. So by November then, the country's leaders knew that the price increase was going to cause some pain and social unrest was likely to result. And one visitor told us that here in Washington. But there were other rumors, too, about a more political kind of uprising that might occur in January, possibly from opposition groups based in the South, in the southern part of the country. And some were already insisting, once again, that the government revisit its own foundations and hold a sovereign national conference. This has been a call for many, many years to decide the very structure and perhaps even the existence of the Nigerian state, an idea that was also supported by the Northern Arewa youth. Now, December set the stage for this difficult January that followed. On the 20th of December was the Operational Bonga spill, which was described as the worst in 13 years in Nigeria. By the 22nd of December, Shell announced that they had contained 50% of the spill. But on the 25th of December was a very tragic attack at Madala Church, where in Niger State in the north, where 26 parishioners died, nearly all of them Igbo. And on the 1st of January, in response to a number of attacks by Boko Haram in various parts of the north, a state of emergency was declared in portions of 4 northern states. And then also on the 1st of January, New Year's Day, was announced the lifting of 100% of the subsidy, which raised the price of petrol in this country, poor country, to $3.50 a gallon. So when it finally came, this massive January awakening renewed the personal awareness of what it means to be a citizen, demanding social and economic justice, and the ear of the government. It was a popular reminder to a government that had for a while turned inward, concerned with all the technicalities of governing and distracted by the spreading momentum of attacks by Boko Haram. The people, his supporters, demanded to be engaged. Protests throughout major cities in the country were mounted almost immediately following the sudden and ill-timed and clearly unwise doubling in the price of gasoline on New Year's Day. Most traditional economists conceded that it made good macroeconomic sense, but the micro effects of nearly every commodity doubled in price, even a haircut, in which, in a country where 70% of the people live on less than $1.25 a day, came as an untenable reality. Moreover, this announcement came as a notice posted on the website of a lesser government agency. It lacked the courtesy of public preparation and explanation from the head of state. The voting public, which had granted President Goodluck Jonathan a resounding mandate in April, felt betrayed. Their leader had forgotten the operative rule in a democracy to carry the people and their will along. So as a consequence, the month unfolded along 2 opposing dimensions. First came a certain euphoria as people once again found their voice in rallies organized by civil society and political opposition, supported by a 6-day strike called by the 2 major unions. They succeeded in rolling back the subsidy from 114 naira, the cost of fuel from 114 naira to 97 naira. It was a 40% increase. Second came the aftermath, a gruesome repeat of the April election, with a Boko Haram insurgency unleashing unprecedented violence in the north, bringing great anxiety and fear to all Christian institutions and to the state in general. And it is still a sobering and worrying period. Jonathan conceded that Nigeria had reached a dismal watershed resembling the Biafran War. Even the activist Soyinka, not one normally known to douse the flames, called for calm and warned against ethnic retaliation. Gowon and Jonathan's old northern rival, Ibrahim Babangida, ultimately commended the president for his management of the fuel subsidy crisis. That was an appeal to peace. So January was a truly transitional moment, a period of personal and collective empowerment and collective anger. It opened a Pandora's box of unresolved issues, some as fundamental as the nature of the presidential system in Nigeria itself, and it generated an avalanche of facts and revelations unknown to most citizens before. Increasingly, people learned about the multifaceted and massive financial, political, and economic fraud that underpinned the so-called subsidy, perpetuated for 40 years. It had enriched dozens of bogus importers of gasoline who sold subsidized fuel to neighboring countries at higher prices, who manipulated exchange rates, who wrote multiple bills of lading for a single shipment, who lied about the real import costs, and to protect themselves, left the 4 local refineries running at maybe 20% capacity. It was acknowledged that some of these same importers also bankrolled many elections. Worse, the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and KPMG, the auditors, have been at a loss to find the truth. And it appears the key officials in government can't find it either. A new committee then was formed under Alpha Belgore to build a blueprint to guide the deregulation of the downstream industry, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has been instructed to hunt down and prosecute the fraudsters. If you think about how well we've achieved tackling the mortgage abuses, I suggest we just stay tuned on that. Well, perhaps. The subsidy protests, strikes, and Boko Haram attacks were the main but not the only important developments in this last month. In a few minutes I have left, I'm going to briefly mention some of the other events, review their implications, and offer some suggestions about what we can expect for the near future. Along with the subsidy removal came assurances from the government of compensation through a program which they called the Subsidy Reinvestment and Empowerment Program, the SURE program. And it involved a number of very elaborate development projects, many of which are contained in Goodluck Jonathan's transformation plan for the country. But despite this rather belated explanation of compensation, on the 3rd of January, protesters took to the streets, along with some opposition party movements, the Save Nigeria movement, and some others. On the 8th of January, the president announced that he was going to reduce his salary by 25%, as well as that of his cabinet. But despite that, on the 8th of January, the labor unions announced strikes, and they joined the civil society protests. On the 9th of January, a very concerned Wole Soyinka warned Nigerians of the possibility of another civil war. "Let this fire not spread," was the headline of a press statement that Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, and J.P. Clark wrote together. And Soyinka said, "As long as any part, however minuscule, opts for the more difficult path of envisioned forbearance, we are convinced that its responses will find neighbor emulation between homesteads." In other words, don't attack each other, please, Nigerians. Interestingly, on the 11th of January, in a very different tack, the Joint Task Force, the Operation Restore Hope that's been working in the Niger Delta for the past, 15 years, was suddenly rebranded as Operation Pulo Shield. This was to protect the region from oil bunkering and illicit refineries. It's the membership of this group expanded from just military and police and intelligence services to prisons, to the Maritime Agency, to customs, and so on. And in addition, at this point, one of the kingpin ex-militants named Tom Polo, who had created a company called Global West Vessel Specialist Agency, was given an enormous contract to ensure the security of shipments along the Niger Delta coast. This has been quite controversial and an interesting way of bringing the militants into the security arena. On the 15th of January, there was an arrest in Borno State of a man named Kabir Sokoto, who was the mastermind of the terrible Madala church bombing. But unfortunately, his capture, which was extremely cleverly done using GSM cell phone technology, was undermined by an organized escape from within the police service itself. And this seemed to justify Jonathan's concern that Boko Haram had begun to infiltrate his security services. Meanwhile, the discussions between the labor unions and the Jonathan administration continued, and the strikes were ended on the 16th of January, on a Monday. It was not long after, on the 20th of January, that a series of attacks were launched by Boko Haram, a major attack in Kano with 20 explosions. 300 IEDs were found. They were very sophisticated attacks, indicating somewhat of a step change in their capacity. And this was followed by 4 more attacks in the next 10 days. The last one was last night. And so this is a very worrying trend indeed. In addition, Olav mentioned Bielsa State. The Minister of the Ministry of Niger Delta, Mr. Elder Orubebe's house was attacked. It's said by ex-militants who feel that they had been left out of the amnesty program. They were not receiving the same payoffs as the 27,350 others who are enrolled in this program. And it's hard to know who was behind this attack, but in any case, his house has been secured now. And so the most recent area of concern is that Boko Haram has taken a leaf out of Men's book, Men's being the insurgency in the south that has gone very quiet in the last 6 months. But they did have a spokesman who helped to sort of organize and orchestrate their activities named Jomo Bomo. And we now seem to have a Boko Haram that has realized that they need a face. They need a spokesman. And they have 2. One is the so-called leader, Ibrahim Shekau, who has appeared on YouTube this week twice. And there's another named Abu Kaka, who makes some extremely virulent threats, including an attack on the city of Sokoto, which is imminent. And so this is the situation we find ourselves in at the end of this month. So there are a number of worrying trends. If you give me a minute to go through. Okay. I see as most worrying for the future, first, the continued disaffection of northern politicians who see the April 2011 election as a theft of their rightful mandate because of an agreed rotation between the North and the South for the presidency, which somehow was circumvented during this last election. And their marked silence in the face of some of the most egregious attacks by Boko Haram and others in the North suggests that they are not using their authority to control these activities at all. The second concern, of course, is the increased sophistication and momentum of Boko Haram. This group, which is in fact called People, is real name, People Committed to the Propagation of the Prophet's Teachings and Jihad. That's his actual name. And it seems to have three dimensions. One is a hardcore ideological dimension. One is political. They have worked as mercenaries in the past for certain political politicians and political parties. And one is the original sort of Boko Haram, which was also called Taliban, which was a grassroots Salafist movement striving for economic and social justice as well as a new religious state. And so this increasing intensity and sophistication, moving from these simple IEDs to these vehicle-based IEDs, which started to be used last June, is a great worry. In addition are the communications, the use of leaflets, which are now being continuously spread around major cities in the north, calling for the establishment of a Islamic State under Sharia.
We bring it to
Okay.
close.
Then there is also a growing sectarian and ethnic divisions in the country. The massive withdrawal of a large number of Igbos from the north, and the need to reorganize the police and security. And so this is another area that has been recognized in this last month. The Inspector General of Police was asked to step down. He was replaced by someone who committed himself to tackle the issues of Boko Haram, and another committee has been set up to review the police structure and its organization. And the environment and the Action on UNEF report has already been mentioned, but my final and I think the most important concern is that this government could find itself in a continuous state of siege, that it will see itself destabilized, unable to carry out its transformation program. It will be unable to engage constructively and proactively with the population. It will be a reactive rather than a proactive government. It needs to change its stance toward one of proactive leadership in order to find unifying solutions for the country and to communicate in a more concerted and sophisticated way with the population of Nigeria.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deidre. I take back everything I said about not talking about Boko Haram. It seems that we have. I was under the impression you were going to talk about oil spills, but that's okay. It was very comprehensive. Our next speaker is Ambassador Eunice Reddick. She's a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, and she's currently the director of the Office of West African Affairs in the State Department. She served as ambassador to Gabon and to Sao Tome and Principe. She has been head of the Office of East African Affairs. She's had numerous positions and appointments in Africa and Asia, and we're delighted to have you to give us the State Department and the U.S. government view of what's going on.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Jeter, and I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you, Steve, for the invitation. The topic we are addressing today is a crucial one for those of us who care about Africa. The home of 1/5 of Africa's population, You know, what happens in Nigeria affects us all. Nigeria is the linchpin to peace, stability, and prosperity in West Africa and beyond. It is an important partner for us on the world stage, not only in places like Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, and Niger, but also Sudan, Libya, and Iran. How Nigeria addresses its many serious challenges in such a large and diverse country can provide lessons for countries large and small all over the world. And these challenges are well known. Dr. Lepine has already spelled many of them out. But again, decades of corrupt governance have seriously degraded the country's health, education, power, and transportation infrastructure. Living standards remain the same today as in 1970, despite over $300 billion in cumulative oil revenues, with 90% of Nigerians living on less than $2 a day. Serious security issues loom on several fronts. The large-scale killings in northern Nigeria by the extremist group known as Boko Haram. Again, the subject is out there, and we will be talking more about Boko Haram. The ongoing sectarian clashes in the Middle Belt and unrest in the Niger Delta. However, credible elections last May provided a positive step forward in accountable governance. And we were encouraged by President Jonathan's appointment of high-profile, reform-minded officials to his cabinet. Nigerians themselves are impatient for transformational change, as seen by the mass mobilization of people in response to the removal of the fuel subsidies just in the last couple of weeks. What Nigeria needs is strong and concerted leadership to address these challenges in a comprehensive and inclusive manner. So let me focus my remarks on one such challenge, and that's the dangerous escalation of attacks from the group known as Boko Haram. If I can continue. Okay. Addressing this threat means acknowledging the contradiction surrounding it. Boko Haram does not enjoy popular support in the north, but there is a minority that views their objectives favorably. Boko Haram does not provide practical solutions to northern problems, but they capitalize on popular frustrations with corruption, income equality, and poor delivery of government services. Boko Haram furthers philosophies and tactics most Muslims and Christians abhor, but they seek to exploit religious differences in order to create chaos and make Nigeria ungovernable. Further, what we refer to singularly as Boko Haram is actually multiple factions with different agendas, again, as Dr. Lepine has already pointed out, as well as criminal gangs who emulate their tactics. We need to tailor our approaches so we both address, and that's Nigeria and the U.S., long-standing grievances in northern Nigeria while protecting innocents from criminal and militant attacks, especially in Borno State, where citizens have endured nearly daily attacks over the last year. Boko Haram and other violent extremists are a product of events, history, and political context specific to Nigeria. Despite all the talk about links with groups in Mali, Niger, Somalia, the dominant actors, issues, and dynamics reside in Nigeria and are responsible to Nigerian government actions and conditions. In a way, that's good news because it means that Boko Haram is a problem Nigeria itself can solve on its own. Therefore, we should focus our attention on the local drivers of extremism, in particular the political dynamics over which the government has some control, the federal and state governments. Let there be no doubt the United States strongly condemns acts of violence by extremist groups. We urge Nigerian authorities to hold accountable those responsible for violent attacks while protecting innocent civilians through law enforcement operations. No one can evade protecting, respecting human rights, not those who instigate violence, nor those charged with responding to it. We condemn attempts by those in Nigeria who seek to inflame Muslim-Christian tensions and call on all Muslims and Christians to protect vulnerable minorities within their communities. Restraint on the part of the security services, the military in particular, is needed to ensure the public is on the government's side. Nigeria would be well served by setting up independent mechanisms for investigating allegations and punishing offenders. Nigeria's international peacekeeping troops are trained in how to respect the human rights of the populations they are sent to protect. Those within the country should be held to the same standard. Nigerian officials should focus on the political environment that makes Boko Haram so dangerous. And these were issues that were discussed just last week in the Cooperative Security Working Group of the Binational Commission in Abuja. The government needs to appoint a credible northerner who can coordinate state and national efforts on key social and economic grievances in the north. This leader would have both symbolic and practical importance, providing access to civil society groups who represent grassroots opinions. The Nigerian government needs to demonstrate its responsiveness to the people and put distance between them from the accusations that it is corrupt and unresponsive to the needs of everyday Nigerian life. It would also be useful for the government to increase efforts to resolve political and economic disputes in Jos and other high-violence flashpoints. Deny the ability of Boko Haram to exploit ethnic and religious differences by demonstrating the benefits that a pluralistic society has to offer. So in closing, it's the sense that we have that Nigerians can best counter violence with the strengths that Nigeria has in spades. Its abundance of talent, its federal character that draws on the abilities of Nigerians from all regions, and its diversity of opinion that allows approaching problems from multiple angles at the same time. How Nigeria addresses the many serious security challenges in such a large and diverse country can provide lessons for countries large and small. The United States is committed to cooperating with Nigeria to making this world a better place, starting right within the borders of this giant of Africa. So thank you very much, and be happy to answer questions you might have later on in the program.
Thank you, Ambassador Reddick. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I have some myself. Dr. Peter Lewis really needs no introduction. He's known to everybody. But let me just mention a couple of the titles, present and past, that he's held. He's currently a senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Africa program there. He's associate professor and director of African Studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS, School of Advanced International Studies. He's been a fellow here at the Wilson Center, a national fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, and a Fulbright fellow in Nigeria. He's written extensively on Africa and particularly on Nigeria, and we're delighted to have him on the panel today. Peter.
Thanks, Ambassador Jeter. Well, coming up last after a very impressive succession of very able speakers leaves me with relatively little to say, but I'll try and say something just to cap off the remarks and to lead into discussion. I'm pleased to see that even though I think we were kicked out of the auditorium upstairs, that hasn't dampened interest in Nigeria, and perhaps the Haiti topic is one that garners at least no more interest than Nigeria, and perhaps a little bit less, so we have a full house. Well, indeed, it's been a season of discontent in Nigeria, a season of challenges. I'm so far avoiding the other C word of crisis, since we have yet to see how things will play out, but it is a dramatic contrast from the afterglow of good feelings that trailed the elections in April, and the sense of optimism that indeed, as Deirdre Lepin has said, there were hopes that a more committed, more focused, and more competent government would lead Nigeria over the next presidential term. Unfortunately, in the last 2 months, there have been a series of events, and the country has seemed to lurch from one bad headline to another. Obviously, as we've talked about, those two converging challenges are the situation in the north, which has rapidly escalated into a really dire situation, one that is larger in its scope and its intensity and its severity than would have been imagined even 2 or 3 months ago, and the broad popular contention on the removal of the fuel subsidy, which I believe in its way poses an equally great challenge to the government. And what these two issues represent are fundamental challenges to this administration of its capacity to govern, and fundamental challenges to the resilience of Nigerian society. So let me take up each in turn. And I'm sorry, Ambassador Jeter, but Boko Haram is just is just on the table. In terms of Nigeria's national challenges, the Bonga spill is certainly an issue of note, but it's certainly a distant third to these other two issues in terms of what people are thinking about. So we know a bit about the history of Boko Haram, its origins in Maiduguri and Bauchi, Yobe State, around 2002. It's about a decade old. Its central leader and preacher, Muhammad Yusuf, was an inspirational Salafist figure for the movement. In 2009, after escalating tensions between the movement and authorities in the north, the police and the military launched a series of attacks on Muhammad Yusuf and his followers. Muhammad Yusuf was killed in an extrajudicial killing, which is available to you on YouTube, and more than 600, some people say 1,000 followers were also killed in that crackdown. And this scattered the movement in the near term and subdued it in 2009, but they regrouped and came back with a vengeance within a year. And in 2011, we've seen a very rapid escalation of the capacity and scope of groups calling themselves Boko Haram operating across the north. In August, a car bomb devastated the UN compound in Abuja, killing several dozen people. Earlier this month, as we've heard, in Kano, Bauchi, and other locales, there have been more than 300 people dead, I think, in the total scope of the bombings and the killings. So what led to this? Partially, it was a regrouping and a process in the aftermath of the 2009 killings, but also it was very much connected with the April elections. Certainly, it is true that President Jonathan trumpeted and articulated loudly and consistently a desire to have better elections. He appointed a new head of the Electoral Commission, and those of us who observed the elections and many people who analyzed the elections, along with the vast majority of Nigerian media, Nigerian civil society, and Nigerian domestic observers, in the event in April, declared it to be a dramatically improved election which gave voice and validity to the majority of Nigerian voters. Unfortunately, what was less well observed at the time and what became apparent in the ensuing weeks was that the good feeling about the elections and electoral reform was certainly prevalent, if you will, in the lower two-thirds of the country. But it was not prevalent in the northern states. And indeed, even in the twilight of voting on Election Day for the presidential election, riots and violence erupted across the north. There were several 100 deaths, including 600 in southern Kaduna state alone, until the security forces cracked down and restored a semblance of order in the days after the presidential election. But there was a lingering discontent and anger, both among elites, the politicians who felt that they had been preempted in the prevailing power-sharing arrangements by President Jonathan, who hails from the South, from the Niger Delta, and is a Christian. And so the northern politicians were aggrieved, but also the Talakawa and the people on the streets in the urban centers were equally aggrieved, not because they were particularly loyal to their own northern elites, but because they felt that the traditional northern ability to craft coalitions, to maintain some purchase on national power, to maintain some relevance in bargaining relationships in this large roiling state of Nigeria had failed, and that the North had simply lost any sense of identity or any sense of power. And so there was rage on the streets. It was often confused, it was often misdirected, and it was in some sense aimless, but it was rage that came out of a sense of disempowerment, a sense of marginality, and a sense of deep social frustration at the chronic poverty, the failure of the national government to provide fuel, electricity, roads, jobs, or any other basic services, education, health, and other services that people had come to expect. That was the northern response. And indeed, Boko Haram, while it is a small movement, while it is essentially a sect that has a claim on the loyalties and ideas of only a tiny minority of northern Nigerians, nonetheless taps into a broader sense of resentment, of anger, a sense of marginality, and a broader catchment and demographic of alienated, unemployed, poorly educated northern youth. We had a sense of just how big the educational deficit was some years back when I worked in the early Afrobarometer surveys in Nigeria, and we asked people about their educational attainment. And we found that in the desperately poor Niger Delta, which we hear so much about, fully 70% of people had gotten through some degree of high school. And I think something like 60% had graduated high school. In the North, we found that 57% of the people said that they had no formal education whatsoever. That is to say, 57%, nearly two-thirds of Northerners in their own self-reporting had not been in the public school system to any degree. So that gives you a very clear sense of the educational deficit if you look at a poor area of the South and a marginalized area of the South compared to a marginalized area of the North. The other element here which should be mentioned is the origins or the location of this rebellion and this insurgency, rather. This is coming from Kanem Bornu, which is outside of the traditional emirate system. And I won't bore the audience with a tedious and dense historical recounting of the boundaries of the system. But it is interesting to note that in the last decade in Nigeria, Kanem Borno, which is outside of the traditional northern Islamic leadership, and the Niger Delta, which is outside of the traditional Eastern leadership, and the Ijaw-centered insurgency, have been the two centers of insurgency in Nigeria. And so the problems of marginalization, as it's often called in Nigeria, have really very much come to the fore here and are being at least partly expressed here. What does Boko Haram want? Partially, they are aiming at simply self-interested organizational survival. They are contesting with the government and launching attacks so that the government will relent in its efforts to repress and contain the movement so that they can get their people out of prison, so that they can essentially survive and continue as a movement. Short of their immediate goals related to self-interest or their immediate self-interested goals, their broader objectives remain murky. we are very unclear as to how many different centers of leadership or organization there are in groups that call themselves Boko Haram. They have committed suicide bombings. They have attacked Christians. They have attacked Muslims. They have robbed banks. They have staged jailbreaks. And so there are a variety of activities, all of which could be coordinated by the same group, but very possibly are not being coordinated by the same group. Their external links remain very murky. Some spokespeople connected to the movement, supposedly, have claimed connections with al-Qaeda in the Maghreb and al-Shabaab, and most recently, Abu Kaka claimed kinship and coordination with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which was hardly credible since he said that they had been trained in Saudi Arabia when they went on the Hajj, sort of breaking off from the line so that they could just meet up with their trainers and then go off to another corner of Mecca and get some training. That seems scarcely credible. So what's going on here? Well, in a sense, you could be looking at a movement that's trying to get street credibility. In a sense, you could be looking at a spokesman who may even have links to elements of government that are anxious to present the movement as being a terrorist threat. It's very uncertain and very murky. And so we're short on facts other than the undisputed fact that Boko Haram has become a deadly insurgency, not just a security problem or a challenge, but an organized, capable insurgency in northern Nigeria, capable of coordinating attacks, evading ordinary security precautions, striking at military encampments, at police installations, at government offices, and of course striking at unprotected Christians and other civilian populations, including some Muslim politicians and apostates in the north. And so it's a very virulent movement and certainly a central challenge for the government. Let me turn very quickly and more briefly to the question of fuel subsidy. And then I want to bring these two issues together, and I want to do this all very briefly because I know we want to have a conversation. The economic arguments for the fuel subsidy are perfectly sound. I would agree with most policymakers in Abuja and with many economists. It's regressive, that is to say, a large amount of money is paid out and most of the benefits are captured by elites because the people who use the most gasoline and the most petrol-dependent machinery and so forth tend to be elites. It's very costly to the national budget and it's distorting. And when you have controlled below market prices for fuel, there is no possibility that any private investor will come in and invest in the downstream petroleum sector, which is badly needed to rehabilitate Nigeria's collapsed refineries and its collapsed fuel production system. So far so good. There's a case to be made for subsidy removal. That said, the exercise that we saw and the rollout that we saw in January could not have gone worse. And the problems now, as a sort of retrospective analysis, were clearly many. Number one, the subsidy was lifted as a kind of shock therapy. All at once, prices more than doubled, and so it was a severe price shock on badly strapped Nigerians who, as Deirdre has said, in the main are struggling very at the margins of subsistence. There was very poor preparation for this, notwithstanding the government's insistence that if you look back at the record, we consulted, we announced, we gave everybody notice. That is not the perception on the streets. And if you read the commentary, if you look at the media, if you listen to the protesters, they don't feel that there was any consultation or preparation. They certainly weren't sold on the program, and as we know very often in politics, perception is reality. So there may have been very well-meaning intentions and efforts within the President's office to try to canvass some opinion on this, but that's certainly not the way it appeared successively. Then two things happened which were not anticipated and not calculated. Number one, the rippling price effects, which immediately registered throughout the economy, simply were not calculated by the policymakers. There was an assumption that, well, fuel prices are a certain component of transportation and a certain component of other costs, and so the accountants will figure out what the price rise should be. But in an economy where you don't have accountants running everything in the marketplace, and in a situation where people are operating on such narrow margins in terms of their income and their subsistence, there was a great deal of what one person has called opportunistic inflation. That is to say, everybody seized on this as an opportunity to double or triple prices. So immediately, transportation and food doubled, and these obviously are the key components of expenditure for most poor and working Nigerians. And so it was a very abrupt shock, which was not planned for and certainly not compensated for in the near term by government. The other miscalculation, and they came by it honestly, I don't know how many people really could have foreseen this, was simply the national mood. Nigerians are deeply frustrated. They've been through government after government. They had the misgovernance and extended malaise of the Yar'Adua administration, the drama around the elections, a fairly long lag after the April elections without a lot of policy momentum or a lot of change on the ground, and then this big shock. And it happened at a particular moment. It happened at a moment when two things were present in Nigeria. Number one, 80 million cell phones. Number two, the demonstration effects of both the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring. So Nigerians have been well aware throughout the last year of social protest and grassroots movements opposing inequality, corruption, ossified leadership at the top, and so forth. And they can raise a crowd. And they can do it overnight because they can text and they can get on email and Facebook. There's 150 million some odd Nigerians. I think 149 million, 900,000 of them are on Facebook, at least going by my news feed. And so it's fairly easy for them to get on. Seriously, the estimates I think are 5 to 7 million. That's a lot of people. And so the government, I think, misstepped badly in its public communication campaign and in its coalition building. So what do we see here? We see two drastically, and I would say even radically different issues. One is a small Islamic insurgency, very dangerous, very deadly, very high profile in the north, drawing on one set of grievances and linkages and social ties, and then this much broader popular movement in the south. And the reaction, of course, as we've heard, has brought in trade unions, professional groups, students, ordinary Nigerians from all walks of life, the burgeoning middle class, certainly the workers, the informal sector, people in the rural sector. Nigerians are mad and they're mobilized. And even though the administration compromised on the fuel subsidy reduction and backed off of its policy a bit and got a handle on the strikes in the near term, my expectation is that we haven't seen the last of it. And not that this is going to unleash a Tahrir Square-like movement which will topple the regime. That's not the trajectory, and I think that's a misplaced analogy, but it is likely to unleash a steady succession or a steady stream of social protests, critiques of the government, and challenges for better governance and greater equity. Because as Deirdre has pointed out especially, in the aftermath of the subsidy removal announcement, a whole slew of hearings in the Assembly and analyses, some ad hoc, some more empirically grounded, appeared in the Nigerian media. And a lot of the analysis that was being presented by the government looked pretty flimsy. There were widely different estimates of what the actual costs were. There were widely different estimates of how much had actually been paid out in the subsidy. There's a very good argument by Alex Gillis from Revenue Watch, which I would commend to you, which suggests that one of the possible reasons for lifting the subsidy when it occurred was because in the budgeting exercise, the central policymakers were stunned to find out that fraud had reached such epidemic proportions in the subsidy system that they had overspent by at least double what their estimated subsidy was in the budget. And so it had just spun out of control, and it was, in a sense, an act, a kind of emergency act, an act of desperation to try and get a handle on this. So there is a lot of question about the credibility and capability and competence of the government being asked in Nigeria, and how they handle this going forward will obviously be a big test of their legitimacy. And so what we see in both of these movements are an unfortunate resonance of division in Nigeria, a sense of marginality, and a deep-seated failure of government to provide some sense of opportunity, some sense of hope, and some sense of basic accountability to the population. It may have less to do with the particular nature of the Jonathan government, although there have been missteps and things that we could analyze there, and more to do with just the concatenation of events. But it is falling to this government to try and bring some sense of equilibrium and some sense of accountability into Nigeria's troubled democracy. I have some policy recommendations which are basically don't list Boko Haram as a terrorist group and work with Good Luck Jonathan on reform. So there I've said it. And the State Department said it much better, so I will conclude there.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Now we're going to go to questions. I'm sure there are lots. Dr. Michael?
Michael, Georgetown University.
Good. Wait a minute.
There are microphones.
Gwendolyn Michael, Georgetown University. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, all the panelists. I'm trying to reconcile something that appeared to have been hopeful before, and that was the return of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to Nigeria as a finance minister, and a belief that there was probably going to be tremendous capability, therefore, within the government's financial and economic management and all of that. But what I'm hearing suggests something totally different. And I'm wondering how to read that. Should I read it that there are deep divisions within the government which handicap their ability to deal with these economic issues? Or how should I read it? It's hard for me to believe that they could have been so uninformed about the possibility of this kind of reaction.
Actually, I prefer to do them one at a time. Anyone?
Ngozi was definitely behind this push to remove the subsidy. And she did it for very good economic reasons. And the press in Nigeria also suggested that the IMF was having some influence on her and the timing of the subsidy removal, because everyone in Nigeria thought that it was going to be April. And so it was a shock. Part of the timing was a shock. that it was the 1st of January instead. But I don't think it's Ngozi's job in the government. She's an economist, and she's the head of the Economic Committee. It's not her job to communicate to the people the policies or to really analyze the impact of the policies on people's social lives. I say that there are others in the coterie of the president who should have known better. And what is needed desperately in this government at this time is a much better communication and messaging strategy. What is needed is a collection of real professionals who know how to present a plan and roll it out. And there are plenty of people in Nigeria who do this. The oil companies do it very well, for example. And how to mobilize the population. They've demonstrated they could do that because of the last election. They did a beautiful job of social mobilization, so it can be done. And also PR, simple PR, how to present the issues in an acceptable way. And they also need some sociologist who can analyze impacts of events such as a 100% removal of subsidy in one fell swoop. So I think that they might start putting together that team, but I don't think that that's Ngozi's job.
Thank you. Tony Carroll, Manchester Trade. Perhaps, Peter, you can best address this. Among the various reasons given for the Kano attacks particularly were some retribution for the lack of protection money paid to Boko Haram leadership from governors. Particularly mentioned were Governor Shekarau, and I think I'd like to see if you see any credibility to that. And then just as a general comment, in my observations in Nigeria, is the central government has virtually no credibility and able to deliver on any of its promises on what would be the spoils or the benefits from the removal of subsidy. I think the only traction in governance that has been achieved in Nigeria has been very localized. Some of the governors have been responsive to the needs of the local citizenry, populous northerners, Governor Fasciola in Lagos State. But apart from that, the central government, notwithstanding the wonderful talents of the Minister of Finance, who has very little of a political basis, we all know in Nigeria, there's just no credibility that the central government can deliver on its promise of being able to use these subsidies for anything that the people have any belief in whatsoever.
Yeah, this is a. Can I just take it? This is both good questions. I don't directly know very much about what kinds of transactions or understandings there may have been between Boko Haram elements and Governor Shekarau. I do know, since it's well documented, that Muhammad Yusuf had strong ties with the ANPP governors in the Northeast during the mid to late 2000s. And there was a falling out there. But the point is that we have to see, even though Boko Haram itself appears to be a Salafist sect without any political presence or political ambition, and indeed an antipathy for secular politics, appearances are deceiving there. They had relationships, they had protection, there have been senators that have been accused of strong ties with them and so forth. And so the relationship between the politicians and elements of this movement are shadowy, but nonetheless distinctly evident. That is to say that they clearly were there. So that idea that let's say the siting or the location of the next attack is partially an extortion game is not, I think, far-fetched. But you raise another excellent point, and it's something that I left out and really should emphasize, and that is simply that the premise in the president's, in the government's unrolling this subsidy removal was that we'll save $8 billion and we'll give it to the governors for development. and Paul Collier wrote an impassioned op-ed saying, why wouldn't Nigerians want this? This is in their economic interest. Well, you know, Nigerians have watched governors come and go for as many years as you'd like to count, as many decades as you'd like to count. And they view the governors as being a major siphon of resources directly into their pockets and abroad. And they don't see any developmental benefits in most states outside of a few, Lagos and Rivers and a couple of others. And so the idea that, well, we really didn't have our act together in the last $600 billion of revenue, but this $8 billion is really going to do the trick, and you're going to see results starting next month. And all you have to do is put up with doubling of transport and fares and food prices. That didn't quite sell to the Nigerian public. And so, you know, Ngozi, Lamido Sanusi, Bode Augusto, there are other people who have been in the economic team in this administration, and it's a good team. It may not be quite as strong. Arguably it is, but it may not be quite as strong as the team that the Obasanjo administration put together in 2004, but it's you know, the A- team if it's not the A team in terms of what we've seen in Nigeria's history. And so in terms of policy, I certainly give high marks to the technocrats for crafting some good ideas, but the problem is how it's packaged, how it's rolled out, and how it's implemented. And that is a political and administrative issue that's more, I think, than just marketing and communication, but very much in the realm of politics.
Can I add something?
Let's go on to another question.
Hi, I'm Carl Levan from American University, and I just finished writing a book on Nigeria. My question is really directed at Eunice Reddick, and I really appreciated your comments, and I was in many ways encouraged by the diagnosis and some of the solutions that you offered. What I'm a little bit concerned about is that the senior Pentagon official responsible for that part of the U.S. government's response to the problem has offered a surprisingly conventional diagnosis and repertoire of responses all throughout the last several months. So my question is, what's really different this time around? And can you elaborate a little bit on the efforts in the U.S. government to coordinate policy towards Nigeria?
Are you referring to the commander of
Yeah, Carter
Africa
Ham.
Command? Well, we do have other elements, and we work together. So, of course, we work with Africa Command, and they're doing quite a bit in terms of training, for example, professionalization, teaching the military how to respect human rights, how you deal with crowds. Again, that's only one element. Under our International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau at the State Department, we also work with the police, again, similarly, in terms of professionalization. We'd like to do more on community policing as well. So there are a number of tools we can use, and we can work together. So I don't think we have dissonance. It's cooperation. We would like to improve. And again, I think coming out of the discussions we had last week in Abuja on security cooperation, we do see some additional things we can be doing, things we can be doing better. We do need to improve the approach.
Could I just continue on that question? There has been a historic reluctance on the part of the U.S. government to share intelligence with the Nigerian government establishment. I've seen it. We saw it in the Niger Delta. I suspect that is also the case now. I've worked very closely with the Nigerian military, particularly peacekeeping forces, as well as with the police. During my tenure as ambassador, we had a community police program, had people actually in police headquarters who were sent away to faraway places because the IG of police never had any intention of instituting reforms. The military is going to be the military, whether they're operating in Liberia, Sierra Leone, or in Nigeria. It's going to be very difficult to change their modus operandi. That I can assure you. But in some cases, and I think this has backfired in the case of Boko Haram, it inspires fear. What it has done with Boko Haram is that it has inspired anger and vengeance. And that's one of the things that's really driving this, I don't want to call it a movement. It's really a terrorist group. And Peter said, let's not designate it. Okay, I'd like to hear your explanation as to why. It is a terrorist group. If you kill 28 innocent people worshiping in a church, it's a terrorist group. So I just wondered, my question. What came out of the Binational Commission discussions with the Nigerians last week? It was divided into two. One was to talk about, I assume, Boko Haram. The other to talk about what's going on in the Niger Delta. Can you be specific about what actually came out of those discussions?
Mm-hmm. It was divided into two. Last week was only the security cooperation element. The Delta discussion will be held in a separate meeting of a working group. So last week the discussions focused on countering violent extremism, which was again a different type of discussion, not with the Delta region not included. The discussion also focused on dealing with heavy-handed security. How do you deal with the legitimate political and socioeconomic claims of the population in the north? So the discussion did focus on those areas, but not the Delta. So when I say it's not just an Africa Command response, you can see where it would include focus on capacity building that we would be able to draw upon other parts of the U.S. government, focusing on law enforcement, the judicial, dealing in with the socioeconomic deficiencies in the northern part of Nigeria.
Howard, I have a question. Please. I'd like to follow up with a question. I'm just curious. The timing of the Boko Haram attacks, which started the spectacular attack in Kano with the 300 IEDs discovered and so on, was on the 20th of January, and your Binational Commission talks began on the 23rd. Isn't that correct? Do you see any connection there? Do you think it was a display for your benefit?
There certainly has been no claim that I'm aware of in terms of by a Boko Haram spokesperson that connected it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the talks were planned for a while. The talks, I don't know when they were formally announced, but are obviously well known. But again, no connection that we're aware of.
Okay.
Please, could we get a mic up here, please? Thank you.
David Throop, CSIS Africa Program. For the last 40 years, until about 3 months ago, nobody talked about Nigeria falling apart. For the last 3 months, virtually everybody I talk to in northern Nigeria is talking about Nigeria falling apart. And it seems very much to be back on the radar as a possibility. And I would agree with Peter that the fallout from the April 2011 election in the north it is pretty serious. It's a very, very negative view. And Northerners see this as widespread rigging of the election, not only in the north, but also in the south and other areas, that they have a much more negative perception of this supposedly improved election than the international observers gave at the time. Another slight observation is Boko Haram clearly has its ideological core in the Kanuri areas, and Kanuri Islam is very, very different from Hausa Fulani Islam. It's much more conservative, it's much more entrenched, much less Sufi influence. It's an area where if you were likely to get a kickback on an ideological religious basis to westernization and the failure of the secular state, you would expect it in northeastern Nigeria, especially as it's an area which is going through a transformative social experience, that now the majority of the people in northeastern Nigeria are literate, really for the first time. If you take people, men and women, at the age of 25, then the majority of the population, both men and women, are now literate. And that, I think, is posing a challenge to the very conservative social and religious forces of northeastern Nigeria, which is not likely to go away. It's likely to grow, I think, in the next 2 or 3 generations. Maybe if we come back in 50 years, they will have transcended that social moment, but it's a social moment that is only just beginning rather than coming to an end. But my question is, we've had the collapse of the Nigerian state before, from 1960 to 1966. So we know what the trajectory of collapse looks like. If we were to hazard a guess as how far Nigeria has gone down the road of perhaps disintegrating, where have we got to? Have we got to 1963? Have we got to the rigged elections of 1964? Have we got to the verge of the military coup in 1966? How close are we to the precipice? Is it possible to compare the time chronology of the early 60s and the time chronology of the 2010s? And for my guess, it's October 1965, but that's just a guess.
Can I speak to that?
Please.
I think it's 2012. And I think 2012 is 40 years after a devastating civil war, which many Nigerians, young country, but many Nigerians still remember, including many politicians and many generals and many policy leaders. It's a country with a bigger middle class, better communications, 36 states, not 3 regions. And I come down to this. If you want to look at the factors that divide countries, that create critical divisions and lead to civil conflict, there has to be a converging fault line along which large numbers of people all agree. There has to be some leadership that marshals people along that fault line, and they have to have some capacity to organize. They did in the regions and in the army in 1966 and 1967. They did in Rwanda in 1994. I don't see it in Nigeria in 2012. I see a country which could, in a bad case, go down the path of a very violent, disorderly, and uncertain sort of place along the lines of Indonesia in the early 2000s, Russia in the early 1990s, or Pakistan today. But these are not countries which fell apart or are falling apart, despite their deep divisions. So that's my take. I think that there, obviously 15,000 people dead since the transition to democracy 12 years ago or 14 years ago is a very heavy toll, even for a large country like Nigeria. That's a horrific number of people. It would be intolerable in many countries that we know. So violence and the risk of conflict, the liability of conflict is quite prevalent. But in terms of whether we are on some point in a trajectory of collapse, I simply doubt it.
I also would suggest that what has happened in the January awakening is new in Nigeria altogether and unprecedented in Nigeria's history. Never before has the Pandora's box been so open. Never before has the truth been demanded and received. Never before has the government responded to social protest by setting up 6 committees to investigate and reorganize certain parts of the government. I mean, this is new, and it is really a conversation between the people and the government, and it has been permitted by this government in part because it has an open spirit compared to some that have come before it, and also out of a certain weakness. I mean, they simply didn't crack down on these demands, they responded to them. And I think that the future might be rocky, but I think it may be very hopeful if these committees come up with some reasonable changes. Now, the ultimate committee, which many have demanded for years, is to hold a sovereign national conference and talk about the future of Nigeria as a state. There seems, because of these concerns about ethnic breakup, to be perhaps a need for this. And it could be that the government may, as John Campbell pointed out recently, no choice. It could be that this may come to pass. And it would probably be a positive development. And I think that it would help the future of the country.
Please.
Thank you very much. I'm Ed Barber from Good Works International. Fascinating panel discussion. I think what I have to say might be taken in the spirit of, since there haven't been enough problems identified, we need some more. There was an article in last Friday's Financial Times quoting Governor Sanusi about the vastly unequal division of revenues between North and South. By the time he added up the oil premium to the southern states, plus the normal distribution of federal revenues, plus even the bunkering in the South, he calculated that in the 10 years to 2008, there had been as much as 4 times as much money per capita directed to the oil-producing states in the South as to the poor states in the Northeast where Boko Haram got started. I just wanted to ask, to what extent is a correction of this situation even a possibility? Is this something that simply is a given and can't be addressed? What would be your take and your recommendations, any of the panelists?
Well, I can't imagine that at this point in time, anyone in Nigeria would seriously consider reducing the subsidy of 13%. I mean, that was a long-fought battle. And in fact, the last major conference, which was held under Obasanjo to rethink the government, fell apart because the delegation from the Niger Delta demanded 25%, and they were offered 17, and they wouldn't take it. So that ended that discussion. So it's very unlikely. But the amount of money is an issue, but the big issue is what's done with it, or not done with it, as the case seems to be. And this is where the development question that was raised earlier is very relevant. How do the governors in the Niger Delta states utilize these massive funds, and what benefit do the people see from this expenditure to the states? That needs to be addressed, and it should be addressed very soon because at the present time, there's peace in the Niger Delta because of the amnesty, but those amnesty payments are not going to keep people happy forever. And they want development in their region, and they're going to demand it one way or another.
This gentleman has had his hand up from almost the beginning, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jason Rosen. Two questions. One is I read an article that the Supreme Court had either nullgated or decertified some northern governors, and I was wondering how the Supreme Court's decision would be looked at from the perception that we've been talking about today. And the second question is General Azazi was brought out of retirement as a national security advisor to the president. I was wondering how he's looked at as far as being effective. Thank you.
Well, let me perhaps speak to the last question. The government faces a major challenge in reaching out to the North. It was apparent to everybody in April that Northern politicians were deeply aggrieved. It was apparent at the presidential election and the violent aftermath that people on the street were angry. And now we're seeing a sort of deeper discontent. I am quite sure that no matter where the people in Abuja or Aso Rock in the presidency come from, that they're no more than a phone call or two away from being able to find a back channel to elements that are close to Boko Haram. And the problem is that this government, which has a strong representation from the South-South and from the Southeast, does not have good networks or strong ties to the North. And they face the political challenge of building those ties. Now, one other element which I think works to the benefit of Nigeria as an entity in this situation is that it does have a kind of rough democracy, deeply flawed in many respects, bad history of bad elections, lack of accountability, dysfunctional institutions. We know that part of the story. But we also know that there is a broad, open media, a vibrant public sphere, an articulate middle class, and many outlets for different groups and different elements to express grievances and to contest over public issues. And so the Azazi problem, if I can put it that way, is that you have a government that has put together a cabinet, not entirely, but some core elements of the cabinet and certainly the national security apparatus that tends to skew from a particular part of the country. That's understandable. People turn to those that they know. But they need to broaden. They need to be more inclusive. They need to reach out. They need to have some kind of credibility and standing elsewhere. And I think that is really a critical challenge that they face now.
Yeah, and then
on the 5 governors? I just wanted to say that 2 of those governors are from the South. The impact, I haven't seen much discussion of it yet, but the Supreme Court ruling came right on the cusp of elections in two of the states. Adamawa State, which is having its election on the 4th of February, and Bayelsa State is having its election on the 11th of February, and as the interim governor, the Speaker of the House serves. And these are all PDP governors, so if there's any fallout from that, it is the fact that the PDP has lost a little bit of control in this process. They've asked that the interim governors keep all of the key personnel in place, but in Bayelsa State they were changed immediately, which tells you something about the raucous nature of that state and its politics. And there will be a big change probably coming with this next election, although it will still be a PDP candidate who wins, I suspect. But it's not a north-south issue. It affected all parts of the country.
with music and all. The last question. I think, well, please ask your question. You came from Chicago for the meeting. We'd like to give you the opportunity to ask your question.
Okay, the first question from a Nigerian. Just one or two comments first. I think we're, the analysts, particularly Peter, it would be good if you would address, I think, what is probably a hangover from military rule. The decision-making around the subsidy, I don't think it was negligence or ignorance. I think it's just the habit of decrees. And you decree a thing and you think that it will come to pass. And I think it's a really bad habit, and it's one of the things that's affecting the quality of citizenship in the country. As we discuss the governors and the federal government, I think we should also pay attention to local government, which is the most proximate organ of state to the average Nigerian citizen. I think that in addition to a burgeoning middle class, etc., and the internet, is the fact that so many Nigerians are in diaspora. And there is a lot of communication. In fact, remittances from the diaspora sustain a number of families, particularly in the South. I think these are all relevant pieces of data that we should keep in mind. But there's an overriding issue that disturbs me, and that is that perhaps because what I do is diversity. That's what I do at the World Bank, and I've done it in South Africa and in a number of places. There is very little discussion of diversity as a thematic issue. So we talk about North-South, we'll talk about tribalism, etc., etc. But the fact that this amount of diversity has to be managed and more proactively, there is absolutely no investment from the state in this difficulty. And finally, I don't know how many people read or heard Babangida yesterday on what he refers to as, he calls them, on doctrine of Nigeria's settled issues. The first one, he says, this is what I refer to as doctrine of Nigeria's settled issues. Number one, I don't want every one of us to tamper with anything to do with Nigerian unity. Number two, Republican constitution is also a settled issue, more or less. Number three, the states are the federating units of this country. And number four, we are a capitalist country. I mean, I think that the quality of debate in the country is deepening. It's maturing. I don't see any precipice in sight at all. I'm very worried that you would say that the government permitted and that it avoided a crackdown or decided against a crackdown. We're either building a democracy or we're not. And I think that what's happening in the South, and to a more painful extent what's happening with Boko Haram, is indeed the demand for a more mature democracy, for more accountability, for much less corruption. I mean, there's corruption everywhere, but if 50% of the government's revenues cannot be accounted for, I don't think you're dealing with corruption. We need a new word for that. And so it's a country that's in transition in so many ways. We've been demanding a national conference, and that's on the benign side. For people who are more belligerent, they've been asking for a revolution. I think we're somewhere in between the two extremes at this point. But I hope that people who really wish Nigeria well and who recognize that Nigeria is essential to peace, not just in that region, but I think in global terms, given the size of the population, that the recommendations will be genuine and that the engagement will be deep and far-reaching and forward-looking. Thank you.
This must be our last question.
Well, my name is Anselm John Miller. I represent a Council of Ogoni Professionals. My question goes directly to Olav from Shell. I do know that when the UNEP report was released in August of 2011, it specifically called for certain things to be done by the oil companies, the communities, and the government. You said in your presentation that Shell has been doing certain things to implement the report. I also know that part of the report says specifically that Shell should be responsible for the cleanup, or says the government should clean up. I don't know which particular entity or whether it's joint. My question here is, what are those steps and institutions recommended in the report, which is supposed to be public, that Shell has implemented so far? Secondly, who is responsible for paying the $2 billion recommended by the committee, by the UNEP, for the cleanup exercise? Because I discovered that if that issue is not settled, Shell will definitely continue to have problems in the Niger Delta. And I am sorry to say it, this is the fourth time I have mentioned it, that Shell seems not to have smart individuals working in their community relations departments. Because when you give a project in a community that is suffering and that project is not implemented, the community should be approached. Shell should have a more proactive way of dealing with problems, not reactionary. What we have discovered is that Shell seems to take it for granted, and the people are fed up because they suspect that the company is sustained by the military. So that is my own concern.
Okay, I think it was a tip to me to make it short. The report recommended 3 areas that industry and Shell should look at. It was immediately established a presidential commission to handle where this and how this is going to be handled. The presidential commission put in some working groups. One of them was the industrial working group, of which Shell is a part. We have delivered the report. The report is with the Minister of Petroleum, and this is supposed to be published. And we have nothing against that. We are prepared. It should be published. And the right address is actually the Minister of Petroleum or the Ministry of Petroleum that will do it. Or if they want to send it to the Presidential Commission, that's up to them, but it's out of the industry's area. The 3 areas that the industry and Shell should look at is the procedure in remediation and cleanup. It's to review, and we are working on that, and we have a plan for that, and we are also working with independent companies that can come in and support this, and it's basically based on a few cases in the Ogoni land that has been addressed, and we are prepared to handle that. Next side is the general overview of sites that we have in Ogoni land. The challenge there have basically been for Shell to get access to these, because we have been refused access to get in there. In 2009 we got some deals with communities in Ogoni land, and we managed to make an overwork and protect about 100 sites. And we are continuing to do that, and we are still working with the government and the Ogoni communities to get that access and handle this. The last one is on the legal side, and what sort of legal framework, cleanup and remediation should take place. These are the 3 issues. In addition, we have, together with the state of River State governor, worked on some more immediate issues around fresh water, and also to initiate within the joint venture a new trunk line or a big pipeline going to Bonny Island from land inside Ogoni that will take away some of the pressure on pipelines that's been sabotaged regularly within the Ogoni area, and move them in another track to reach Bonny. These are the 5 areas. The issue of compensation, the issue of money that you're referring to, I have more seen the amount of 1 billion, not 2 billion. We can discuss that, but that's mainly been raised in the Senate. And it's an issue between the government and the legislative wing of the government.
That's fine. Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating discussion and panel. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for their contributions. I'd like to thank all of you for the very good and penetrating questions that you've asked. Nigeria is going to face a tough time. It's going to be unsteady. at times very unstable. I think that there are things that are happening in the country now that there's precedent for those things in the past. For example, the Civil War of 1966, where if you get a situation where Southerners are being killed, they respond, Northerners then respond, that can get out of hand. Let us hope that it does not and won't. But the government is going to face many challenges in the coming months. One of which, and I think that this goes back to the question of the government's effectiveness, can they get a handle now that we know that there's a problem in terms of the import of refined petroleum products? Can they get a handle on that situation, identify those who have been involved in corrupt activities in that sector? And I think that this will be a big test for the Jonathan administration. And let's hope that they're able to do so. But thank you all for coming out.
Let me ask you to join me in thanking the panel and thanking Ambassador Jeter. This was an extremely well-informed, talented, experienced panel, full of information, and managing that has been a remarkable job, Ambassador Jeter. Thank you very, very much.